Hey everyone, this is Dr. Kanita on another episode of Arya Holistic Health. I think this is episode 5, which is amazing because it was just an idea I had a couple months ago and now it's coming to fruition. And I've brought my amazing friend, Tina Brockett. She's a functional integrative nutritionist, and we actually met through a mutual friend, um, Jeannie, when I was in Frederick, when I was practicing Frederick part-time, and Jeannie connected us, and sparks were flying. So we developed this amazing relationship since then. And every time I talk with Tina, we get really into just how Chinese medicine and what she does kind of integrate. And I just love talking with her. So thank you so much for coming on my little podcast that I started.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so fun. It's fun to get to play with you.
Yes, and I can say this because I think you'll allow me that Tina and her family come see me too.
Yep.
We have a great time. Oh, minus your son, but eventually we'll get
We're
him.
working. We're working on that.
Yeah, but it's really great to see her whole family and for me to see the family dynamic of how they work. I think when I treat families, it's really interesting to see how everyone's works together and how they're different. But here we're going to talk a lot about nutrition and stress and self-care. But I wanted to let you talk a little bit about yourself, how you got into nutrition. I know your website kind of talked a little bit about that, but I'll let you tell your story.
Oh, well, thank you. So I've always been interested in how food and lifestyle and things affected my body. I used to do marathons and things like that. And I became very aware of if I didn't eat well, if I didn't sleep well, if I was feeling really stressed out, like how that affected my run for a particular day. And then several years ago, my mother was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and surgery went well in that, she came out of it, but there were complications, and she had to come live with me for several months. And I had to instantly kind of become this scientist of food in my world, how to feed her good nutrition that would help her heal, but also taking into account a lot of mechanical issues that she was having in terms of being able to do things. And then there are specific micronutrients that need to be adjusted when you're dealing with a brain injury. So that was kind of my real in-depth foray into nutrition. And I thought, well, you know what? I really love this. And so I went back to grad school and made a total career shift, and here we are.
That's amazing. What was your career before? Actually, I never
In
knew.
which lifetime? I mean,
Which like
I so pre-kids, I used to do I worked for Accenture for a while. And then I transitioned out of that into optical network laying globally, working with cable and wireless.
Oh,
And
wow,
then
that's so random.
so random, right? And then after that, I ended up going into becoming an appraiser, so that I could be around for my children because I was
Mhm.
traveling a lot,
Yeah.
and I just felt like I wanted to be present for their lives. And so I did that. I was a real estate agent along with
Oh my
that.
gosh, what the heck?
Well, Kanita, I balance a lot. So
Yeah.
I did all of that, and yeah, but it was like it filled a need that I
Mhm.
had.
Yeah.
But I don't think it was until I really got into nutrition
Mm.
and working in this realm that I was, found something equally like that I was just so jazzed up about, and really fed my soul, if that
Yeah.
makes sense,
Absolutely. I totally get that. It's interesting because when I met you and like found out what you did, and I was like, I can only see you doing this. And I think we connected so well because
Uh-huh.
that's what Chinese medicine was for me too, where I had to kind of have my hands in different buckets, and Chinese medicine was one of those that, like, oh my gosh, there's always this other layer that you're uncovering. And the same thing with nutrition. Um, how that all connects too. And just like, oh, we're always gonna kind of learn something new. And I know you're always reading research because that's what
I
we talk
am,
about.
because that's what we do.
Yeah.
You might be putting those needles in. It's like, oh my gosh, did you see? Blah, blah, blah,
Yes.
blah, blah.
This is what happens for most of my treatments with Tia. We're just chit-chatting, and
Yeah.
she's like, oh, what does that point do? I was like, oh, that's related to your liver or kidney and all this stuff. So we have a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I think going back to what you were saying as far as like how families interact, I mean, there's energetically, right? You pick up things anyway, no matter if you're around people that you're friends with, you can pick up on their energy. And so, when you're in a family setting like that, you have different energetic things, or the family's responding to different stressors or things that are happening. And I'm always in Kanita's office or treatment space. I'm like, okay, so you're treating us both at the same time. What does my pill say? What does his pill say? Like
Yeah.
about my husband. Like, I'm curious how our bodies are absorbing and handling
Mhm.
and or imbalanced because of different things that we're facing.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's just so incredibly cool. Like what you do, I'm not done learning about it. It's just
I
so
know. Well, I'm
fascinating.
just gonna like inherently teach you through the years
That's
about
fine.
everything. I know we talked about that too. But yeah, it's so because you and your husband definitely, how should I say, like respond to stress. Like your body is always primed to receive stress a certain way. And
Yep.
just like when we get sick, right? Even though it might be the same bug, everyone responds a little bit differently, just how kind of like your, now I call it kind of like how your circle, your wheel is spinning.
Yep.
That's thanks to my class I'm taking, that I think of people that way now. It's like, where in this wheel of life, where are you stuck, or where is it not working properly? Because that could be key to be like, okay, I have to treat this, or I have to treat actually the kidneys first to allow this to
Uh-huh.
happen, or I have to actually unblock part of this channel.
Right.
So it's so interesting now. I mean, you get to kind of see my evolution with how I've been treating, just because
Uh-huh.
I keep learning all that stuff.
But I think that honestly, Kanita, is the mark of a really good practitioner. I really do. And I have such tremendous respect. I mean, I adore you anyway, but no, just what you are learning, how you're evolving as a practitioner, things that you're adding to your toolkit, because not only does it feed your passion, right? But how you're feeding that passion and that knowledge flows through to everybody that
Mhm.
you're treating. And there is, I think it's called a book. I think the book was called My Stroke of Insight, and it was written by
Okay.
a neuroscientist.
Ooh.
And she ended up
Don't
having
give me more books to read. This
I
is so
know, I know.
stroke
Every
of
time
insight.
Amazon arrives at my house, my husband's like, "Oh, look,
Like
it's another
another
book."
book.
Um, he jokes that we're gonna have to like reinforce different parts of our house structurally
Mhm.
because of the weight of the books that I have.
Yes,
But
it's fine.
anyway, what I was gonna say is the mark of a really good practitioner is when you can feel their healing presence. And when this scientist ended up suffering this massive stroke, one of the things she said was she could tell based on the practitioners who was going to be
Mm.
healing to her and who wasn't, from a
Ooh,
very primal perspective, right? Because
very
that's
cool.
what she was reduced to. Yeah.
Wow.
It was really, really
What?
amazing. Yeah, I know.
And
Sorry.
we're totally like, okay, we'll get to the topics we talk about, but we
Sorry.
were supposed to talk about, no, it's okay. But that totally reminds me of, like, I totally believe that sometimes when I treat, there is intuition, and people are like, oh, that's kind of weird, like that's like woo woo,
Yeah.
but it's like I think as a human being, we've always had abilities
Mhm.
to heal and to listen and to, it's like that book from The Gift of Fear, right? Like, I don't know if you read that, but he talks about, the author talks about how, especially women, they do have a gut feeling when something's wrong, something's off. Like we can't say what, but like our bodies know that something is off and we need to get out of a situation or be more aware. So I also believe in the other spectrum that, for me, I'm kind of like, okay, this is even though in my head I have a point prescription for you, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do this. I will change it completely when I like go in the room, like, oh, actually, I'm gonna do this um, instead of this point. And I think it is kind of like this instinctual, this like primal thing that like I want to heal you, and I know which points to do. But
Mm-hmm.
also the fact that when I'm still evolving and still learning, I know my teacher encouraged like, don't worry about memorizing stuff because you're gonna notice that your how you practice is gonna change regardless if you
Of
know and
course.
stuff. And I'm also can tell that I'm changing the way I'm thinking about things. I'm sure, yeah.
And, there is something to be said for, and intuition and having that instinct, and that to me is also just a really good mark of a good clinician, right? Because so much that we run into is if you have A, then B, C, and D are happening, out you
Mhm,
go, right? With very little adjustment. And what I'm hearing from you and what I've experienced as one of your
mhm,
patients is that you pick up on not only my signals, right, of what my pulses are saying and what
mhm,
you're manifesting from a very
mhm,
physical perspective, but you're picking up on anything else that's coming into that mix, and then
mhm,
you are adjusting on the fly to something that is customized for my need
mhm,
in that moment. And that
mhm,
honestly is the direction that a lot of, like, in the nutrition world, we're talking very heavily on personalized nutrition, because there is no one size fits all approach to health and well-being. Everybody's different, what their
mhm.
needs are different. So
Yeah, this is exactly what I talked about with my last person who is a fitness trainer, so it all
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah, it all comes together.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think with what you're doing now, and I think too, it was funny, I was treating this other, teenage girl yesterday, and she was very interested in this, listening to this, and I
Okay.
told her that you were coming on because of how, like, acupuncture has affected her, but also, like,
Yeah.
how can she help other people? Because, we're all kind of realizing it's not, a cookie cutter for everyone. It's everything's has to be there's a mind body connection. Everyone's so different. And then we have like a whole ancestral thing too that's affecting us, affecting our story. So
Absolutely. And, when Kanita mentioned that, when you mentioned, Kanita, that you treat my whole family, you treat my daughter. I have a
mhm,
teenage daughter who's a heavy duty volleyball player. And, what is really amazing when you share with me that you've got other teenagers coming in and they're beginning to, just like my
mhm,
daughter, see the benefits
mhm.
of that self-care, of fixing those imbalances at a very early age. Those are like, that's foundational stuff
Yes, yes.
that's going to last forever.
I I always tell them that I'm like, I'm so happy you're here at this time of your life because I wish I was there. Because part of and we'll go into this too, like emotional health that we don't talk about.
Uh-huh.
And not to say like my parents did an amazing job. I loved them to death. But when I was a kid, it wasn't like a thing to show your emotions, or it wasn't like, you know, it's okay to be angry and like this is why, or like it's okay to be sad and it's okay to cry. It was just for me when I grew up, it was like I held everything in as a kid. And that also affected me like physically,
Yeah.
just like this tight ball. And then I was like, oh, this is not good for me, actually.
Yeah, and unfortunately, when people hold emotions in, and I'd love to see like how that translates
No,
to pulses.
would do that.
That's so cool. I've always been an equal opportunity, like, bleh,
Yeah.
from the time that I was little, I would just be like, this isn't okay with me. And
Mhm.
ironically, my daughter is me times 10.
Yes.
She just like, sometimes I hear how she's saying things, and she's like, you know what? I just said, you know what? This is not okay. And this is
Yeah.
why it's not okay. And I'm
Mm.
like, oh my gosh. So But what you are saying as far as not holding it in and that emotional piece and all of that, that's incredibly important, because I think that the other things that I have seen clinically, especially during the course of COVID,
Mhm.
is teenagers, especially teenage girls, holding what is going on with them in very much
Mm,
emotionally. And then they are looking for ways to exert control
mm,
in their lives. And this concept of COVID and whatever was very stressful for them. And they have no control. Nobody has
yeah,
any control,
yeah.
but they would take things to the extreme with
Mm.
becoming hyper focused on health and well being, but
Oh, yeah.
where it became all consuming. But it goes back to what you're saying, like, if that mental component is not addressed, it has the possibility to be internalized, but it also has the possibility of manifesting itself in different ways that aren't perhaps the healthiest. So
Yeah.
it's like anything, it's a really fine balancing act.
Yeah. My gosh. I know we talked a couple weeks ago about like you were seeing a lot more like teenagers, like you said, trying to exert control. So
Hmm.
either they're like, okay, I'm just gonna, you can correct me. I think they're just over exercising, right?
Yep.
Or trying to like minimize their eating or trying to lose all this weight. Is that
and
correct?
and some of it was not even so much weight driven as it was looking at being feeling strong, right? So
Oh,
I
interesting.
have people that would exercise because when they exercise they feel strong,
Hmm.
and they feel powerful, right? So think about that for a second.
Hmm.
You are over exercising for the need to feel strong and powerful. Why? Because right now, everything that you're facing is so overwhelming and so feels out of
Wow.
control. You're trying to exert control in other ways. As far as it related to food, there became this hyper focus on eating well, eating
Mhm.
correctly, eating and following different rules. And then I can't eat X because it's not a healthy
Mhm.
fat, or it's got too many carbs, or this isn't a health food,
Yeah.
or whatever. And that's really where it kind of boiled down to. Again, I don't have control over the outside world, but I have control over this space. So I'm going to apply all these rules to what
Mhm.
I'm choosing to eat. And on the surface, right, it looks beautiful.
Mhm.
You can look at it and see somebody being like, "Oh, I'm not going to eat this because it's not healthy." And
Yeah.
you're like, "Oh, thank gosh. Yeah, it
Mhm.
isn't the healthiest for you."
Mhm.
But on the flip side of that, when that person takes it to an nth degree where they refuse, they can't,
Mm.
and they have a lot of rules on the healthy foods that they will or will not eat. That's when you got to start looking at getting, these are warning signs that a professional needs to
Wow.
be involved.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know, yeah, because I know you were like, oh my, with some of them, it was kind of like alarming, and you were like, we need to work with someone else here.
Yeah, and as in the world, in the space that I work in, that's altered eating patterns and whatnot
Mm.
is a piece of what I do, but it's not my primary focus.
Mhm.
But that's where I'm kind of like, okay, time out. You need to get a therapist involved.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
need to be talking to this individual's primary care physician.
Mhm.
We need to be looking at the whole picture of what's happening, because and we need to then work towards unraveling some of the stringent rules and things that are out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
um, it's a balancing act. All of
Yeah.
it's a balancing act.
But that's so interesting when you said they, other than the eating, but the exercise part too, whereas like they had to feel strong. And usually people are like, oh, that's great, you're exercising, you know. And for me, I just use it as a stress relief rather than I mean, that's the result, but I don't think of it like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, I use it as I love to exercise.
Mhm.
I feel better when I do. I feel just more balanced and all
Mhm.
of that. And I mean, you're creating positive brain chemistry,
Yeah.
right? So that's
Yes.
totally going to offset that body's stress response. It just, I think here's where the big challenge is. There becomes a disconnect, and this holds true for anybody, right? If
Mhm.
you pursue anything at any degree of excess or behavior in excess, you start to separate your brain from listening to your body
Mm.
and
Mhm.
listening how to move forward. Would you
Mm.
agree? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's ooh, that's so how to kind of like pull this out because that is a lot of things are going in my head with this.
I have no doubt because when you and I talk, it's like, ooh,
Ooh.
that's a good one. Let's go down
Yeah,
that
because
rabbit hole.
yeah, when you said about the fitness and about that extreme to feeling strong, and that kind of triggers something in my head that's like, is that really healthy? And in that case, not so much if they're overdoing it too. But yeah, going to another extreme of like refusing to eat certain things, you do kind of like, hmm, then do you know what actually makes you feel good or not?
You stop being able to listen to
Yeah.
what the cues of your body are saying. And I always say that your body is always talking to you. We just
Mhm.
need to stop long enough to listen. And
Mhm.
so if you're not, if you're ignoring that and trying to push through it, then you're not paying attention. And that's where those, like, as far as exercise goes, that's where injuries happen. Like,
Yeah.
and you and I know we've talked about injuries,
Oh my
and
gosh.
I'm a reformed, like kamikaze exerciser because I didn't listen as well to my body.
Mhm.
And, there are issues that
Yeah.
have resulted from that.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I think I see that with some I talked about this last week too, where it's one food is not inherently like if we say it's bad, and that goes to that extreme of like I refuse to eat this all the time, and knowing like when to listen and when to be like, okay, I really shouldn't eat all of that cake. Like that's probably a good thing because that's gonna make you feel bad.
And I am also of the mindset of like there very much is this diet culture that's out there.
Mhm.
And when you do that diet culture, it actually, you stop really listening to what's going on with your body.
Yeah. Mhm.
And as far as just like you said, do I really need to eat all of that cake? Well, here's what happens psychologically. If you go around and you're saying, I can't eat X,
Mhm.
sometimes this like rebound behavior happens where somebody has a really bad day and they're like, screw that,
Yeah.
I'm gonna, and they're talking to
Yeah.
themselves, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna eat whatever I want.
Yeah.
And then there's this cycle of doing that, overdoing it because it's an emotional thing, and
Mhm.
then becoming very reactionary on the
Mhm.
back end and a lot of guilt. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like, well, no, it's not off limits necessarily. Just,
Mhm.
take everything in stride. And
Yeah.
that's what I work a lot with my
Yeah.
clients on, like
Being
finding
kind.
that balance. Be kind to
I
yourself.
know. I agree. So I had this thought too, because
Yeah,
it might manifest as a question eventually. But I remember, so last week, and this is just so for me, I don't really drink alcohol. And that's just like my personal choice.
sure.
It's not like a, oh, I can't drink it all. Like it's horrible. But for me, I like get super sick. Like it really does not make me feel good. My heart
Okay.
rate jumps up. I get flushed. And my husband too. He was like, oh, I don't want to drink, alcohol for the next year. And he just did it as like something that he noticed that made him feel good. Like listening to
Right.
himself. He's like, oh man, when we drink, um, I don't sleep well.
Hmm.
I get all stuffy.
Totally. It disrupts your stages of
Yeah.
sleep. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's sometimes really frustrating because we were out with friends, of course, and they're drinking and they kind of tease us, which is okay, but they kept teasing us like, "Oh, if you're not going to drink alcohol, you should just stop eating sugar too." It's just like, dude, really? It's like if someone is trying to do something good for themselves, I don't know why other people choose to kind of bring them down. I mean, it's an insecurity thing, probably, but
Well,
it's just
yeah,
such a difficult.
because yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
No, you're
cut you
good.
off. But no, I mean totally. Anytime somebody is trying to do something better for themselves, by you trying to do something better for yourself and they aren't equally trying to do
Mhm.
it, your actions are pointing out what they
Mhm.
perceive as disparities or
Mhm.
gaps that they aren't addressing. And so rather than being supportive, I think that boils down to, them trying to, I don't want to say cut you down, but like trying to rib you
Yeah.
to deflect from the fact that they aren't
Mhm.
equally perhaps taking care of themselves,
Mhm.
which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, and it was, they're friends, so we're just like trying to take it easy. But they kept asking me like, "Oh, how does he feel? Like, is he better?" I'm like, "He's just doing what he wants to do."
He's doing him,
Yeah.
you do you.
Just like let's just like all chill out. It's just like, I don't I think it's like you said, like I'm not going to this extreme, but knowing that okay, I feel this way when I eat things, and like sugar is a number one thing I'm trying to cut down, but it's not perfect, right?
It's fine.
I'm gonna have it once in a while, but I don't eat like a tub of ice cream every night, so that's also good. Um, but it's like I think that aspect of knowing, listening to your body, knowing like, hey, that doesn't really make me feel good, and it doesn't allow me to do the things I love, right? Because when I don't sleep well, then I can't practice acupuncture, like my brain doesn't work. So
Yeah, I mean, and that's a really important thing, right? You need to listen to yourself and be okay with doing whatever feeds your soul, whatever
Mhm.
that is, so that you feel well, so that you can do the things that you want to do. And food, and whether you're sleeping at an earlier time or, maybe you're
Mhm.
going home earlier than somebody else and they're like, oh, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And you just I think that it is harder, like for our teenage population, like
Mm.
the younger
Yeah,
population,
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
unless you're my daughter who's like, no,
Chill. Yeah,
chill,
I mean,
I'm
your
not
daughter's
doing
like a different case because I met a lot of teenagers, and Kira's definitely like, meh.
yeah, she's like, no, I'm
Yeah.
just not going to. But my point is that I think that as you get older and you get to know yourself better and
Mm,
better, like you are saying, I know this doesn't work for me.
yes.
And therefore, I'm okay with not doing it regardless. You do
Mhm,
you, I'm doing
mhm,
me. Let's like, you know,
mhm,
go our own ways and be happy about it.
mhm. Yep, and setting, I think, goes into setting boundaries, right? Because sometimes
Huh?
they'll be like, just have it. Come on, let's have fun. And I'm like, yo, I said no. You gotta respect that. And I know for me and my husband, we at weddings, we're gonna celebrate, so we're gonna drink, and that would be the like I understand mentally what's gonna happen,
Hmm.
but I'm gonna have fun with my friends, and that to me feels good, right? It's just not like this guilt, but I'm just like okay, I'm gonna do that here because it's a celebration. I'm gonna have fun.
You're going to celebrate, you're going to have fun, and
Yeah.
you know that you might not feel so great on the back
Hmm.
end of it. And
Hmm.
you know, I don't know. My husband does the same thing. He has a food that he shouldn't eat, and he knows that he shouldn't eat it, and he loves it.
Yeah.
And, but he's like, I know I'm going to feel bad. I'm like, okay, as long as you know you're going to feel
Yep.
bad for 2 to 3 days, and that's the thing is like learning where that balance is. It's
Hmm.
not like cutting it out entirely
Yeah.
necessarily, but if that's what you want to do, then do it. I think
Yeah.
the cool thing about alcohol, and I'm working on a blog post and I've been
Ooh.
sampling stuff, is
Yeah.
all of these various non-alcoholic alternatives that are coming out. And I really wish that more restaurants and bars and
Mm.
places stocked different stuff, because it presents another alternative where you're participating, but you're not doing so to your own detriment, where you're going to
Mhm.
feel bad on the back end.
Mm.
I remember going out. I was actually in Napa Valley, at a hotel out there, and they had this beautiful seed lip cocktail, and which
Mhm.
was a mocktail, but it was like had cucumber and mint, and
Ooh.
it was so refreshing and so delightful. And, it was perfect.
Yeah.
And you don't get that as much around, but there are a lot of products out there that are
Ah,
starting
I
to
didn't know that.
have, oh, yeah. Oh, we'll talk.
Oh,
We'll
what the
talk
I was like, "You gotta
because
put this blog post
I
out,
know,
Tina."
I will, because I actually has started lining up like versions of various not I mean, I've got like, I don't know, like 8 or 10 different samples, but
Yeah.
I did a mini taste test. I want to do a larger taste test with
Mm.
different people because you know me, I'll eat like straight up like greens, like a green juice, and it doesn't have any fruit in it, and I'm okay with it.
Mhm.
And other people are like, "Oh my gosh, you're drinking long clippings. Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing?"
You're
So
eating grass right now.
you're eating grass right now. So I want to make sure that if I'm putting something out there, that it like I want to have a bunch of people tasting it
Yeah,
so that they
yeah.
can say, yeah, this actually isn't so bad, or
Mhm,
oh, this is absolutely horrible, because
mhm.
my threshold, I
Yeah.
recognize, might be a little bit different than other people.
I'll be one of your taste testers for
Okay.
sure.
Bring you
I
a
want
whole like flight of
Oh,
non-alcoholic
flight,
things.
yes! Oh my god, me and my husband would do it. That'd be amazing
All
because 'cause we're
right.
trying to go that way, but yeah. I wanted to circle back kind of
Yeah.
on I know we talk about, like, teenagers, and we spoke a little bit before in the back studio, how I've been seeing a lot more teenagers how to relieve stress, right? So, a lot of times you like during the pandemic, you mentioned they needed some sort of control, right?
Hmm.
Either exercise or their food. But now I get to kind of see how they're using acupuncture for stress relief. And there have been studies that shown too that when you get acupuncture, it lights up parts of your brain that release your natural endorphins, the
Hmm.
pain relievers. I mean, I know your husband actually was hit. Oh, her husband was super skeptical, let me tell you, of
Oh yeah. Like, I had to pull him in there.
yeah.
I'm like, "Come on, come on, come on, you can do this." My daughter's like, "Sure,
Yeah, I
okay,
know.
whatever."
Although she said some of the words like, "Oh," she's like, "Oh, what's that?" Like she was very surprised at some of this. I'm like, it's okay to feel things, guys. It's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. It's okay, it's all good.
um, but yeah, I think it's amazing now. I really am thankful that nowadays is more accepted
Mhm,
into at least our area is pretty open, I think, to acupuncture, Chinese medicine, the chiropractic aspect, because now they understand, like, hey, when I have a headache or if I have pain or I have all this stress, that I can go get acupuncture or
mhm.
I can do, or most of the time I actually sometimes teach them like massage techniques on acupressure points so they can do instead of maybe something that's not as healthy. I'm not gonna say what, but you know.
Which I think is really good, because I think that, you know, everybody's looking for that pressure release valve, right? And
Yes.
so if we can start to instill in our the younger generation different things that modalities that they can
Mhm,
use. And I know you do Qigong as well. Like,
mhm,
what can they do to bring that nervous system down? And what is really incredible about incorporating things like acupuncture and incorporating other modalities and things that these kids can turn to is that their brains are still developing. So their
mm,
natural stress response, if you it is still developing. And so if we're helping them to learn these coping skills, learn these
mm,
alternate modalities that they can kind of bring into their regular practice, we're setting them up for success
mhm,
for many, many years. So
mhm,
perhaps down the road, that might translate into lower use of different things that they
mm,
shouldn't be using, or frankly that other people shouldn't be using as
mhm,
well. And I know that I work in the recovery community, and a lot of the stories that I get from people, I asked them, are you willing to share, like, whatever, about when you started using, what did you start with? And a lot of it begins in those teenage years, either as acceptance or because they need that pressure release valve. They need something to kind of escape.
It's like what do you call it? Like how to almost like soothe. I heard this term, like soothing mechanisms.
Like a self-soothing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And learning how. That's why I believe like with the emotional health, like as a teen, I was kind of fortunate. Like I didn't know how to deal with my emotions well, but I at least was smart enough to kind of know that, okay, exercise kind of makes me feel good. So if I do this, I feel better. Or
Right.
like doing tennis, I really need to hit something, apparently. And that's not other people. I did do boxing, but that's a little different too. But for me, at least that I had that coping mechanism, I guess we can call it, or a way to self-soothe, so I wasn't like harming myself or doing other things that might be harmful to me.
Right.
Now that I'm reflecting as we're talking, but that makes absolute sense, that those younger years really, because it's like we're so malleable at that point. Still.
Yeah. And those brain pathways and modes of thinking and what's acceptable and what's not. I mean, if you really want to go into it, you're going into like adverse childhood experiences and learning how to deal with those. But those can predispose you to developing a whole host of health issues down the road. So, so learning to cope with that is really incredibly important on the extreme, right? But then like, let's take it on the opposite side of that. So, if you have a higher stress response and so you have these higher levels of cortisol, that stress hormone circulating around, and you're not clearing it from the body properly because we're constantly focused with these intermittent stressors, you're going to end up, you could go the opposite direction, right? Which is not only reaching for different substances or other unhealthy behaviors, but like with that cortisol, it's designed to drop back off. And so that you can kind of like be elevated and then replenish any depletions your body would have had. Well, now people do things like they stress eat. And I've seen a lot of that in the last few years. A lot.
Stress eat. Yes.
Stress eating. And, your appetite is actually, from a chemical perspective, it's being triggered for you to increase your appetite. And then
is that from the cortisol does that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because so normally increases in cortisol are helping you to recover during stressful moments. So like if we think about it from a evolutionary perspective, some of this is designed to go up. We deal with the threat, then it comes back down, we kind of even out. But because we've had to expend all this energy and deal with this threat and whatnot, now we need to replenish those energy stores that we might have used up running away from a tiger or doing whatever the case is. But we're not necessarily running away from a tiger. Maybe it's looking at Instagram. Maybe it's
social media. Oh my
social media is a whole nother thing, but maybe it's seeing something on the news, or maybe we're getting a really unpleasant text message from somebody. So I don't know. It's just, I've seen people, and there's this second piece to this, right? What do people normally reach for when they're stressed out to eat? Something something sugary and sweet. Yeah, right?
I also was actually about to say, funny enough, they'll reach for Instagram too and Facebook, not the food, but they reach for social media where they need to check out. I totally do this sometimes too. I'm guilty of that. But I'm like, I just need to check out for a sec. So, but social media is a whole different thing.
That's a whole nother.
Let's not go whole episode on that, because I have a lot to say about that too. That I talk to other counselors, social workers. I'm sure you see this too, but
yeah. So the thing of it is like you reach for something sweet.
Yeah.
Why? Because it gives you positive brain chemistry. It
Mhm.
gives you that like positive hit. It makes you feel good. But the problem is that then you come down off of this. I always joke when I talk about this subject. Like, do
Mhm.
you remember the movie Daddy Daycare with Eddie
Oh,
Murphy?
yes! I
Where
have seen
he
that.
like feeds them all sorts of like candy and
Yeah.
cookies and cakes, and they're like, "Whoa!" And then they completely crash. So we go up and then we completely crash
Mhm.
back down. And so underneath it all, you have inflammation happening in your body. That inflammation can lead to like affecting your
Mhm.
mental state and make
Mhm.
you feel worse. Then you feel
Mhm.
tired and you feel even more down. What are you going to reach for again?
Mhm. More
It
sweets. It's
More
cycle.
sweets, and it comes this, like, crazy
Oh,
cycle.
I have this really funny thing you would appreciate too, where I'm learning about the Chinese herbal part, and
Yeah.
I never really paid attention to flavors. So like Chinese herbs have, flavor and what channels they enter, but there is literally like a in the classics where it's like when your muscles spasm, and it makes sense because when you're tight, when something's stressing you out, take sweet to relieve it. I'm like, that's so funny. But
That's
it's not saying,
fascinating.
yeah, it's not saying to like, inhale all that, but it's the flavor of sweet itself is soothing in terms of when you have spasms too, like muscle spasms. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, if you think about it, and I always try and, like, trace things back to why would we be like that,
Yeah.
right? So why would we evolve that way?
Hmm.
Well, your sugar, your fat, your salt would be things that we would have in very small quantities. So we're
Yes.
gonna reach for them, and they're gonna make us feel good to prompt us to maybe eat more because we're gonna store crap, in our bodies for later.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know, it's just also so incredibly fascinating.
Yeah, and all the food, and I'm sure you know about this too, is just we're eating foods out of season. There's certain things like with
Yep.
meat that we're not supposed, right? It's very scarce at the time, so you wouldn't eat a lot of meat all the time like a lot of people do now. Uh,
Yeah, absolutely. And then you look at that and you look at even just what's happening today in our economy and the cost
mhm,
of food prices. I talk to people about like meal planning and how to effectively grocery shop and like what
mhm,
they can do to optimize what their budget is. And the first and foremost thing I say is try and eat in season. We're heading into the spring. We're going to have CSAs available.
mhm,
Community supported agriculture, as well as like farmers markets and things like that. Find ways to be creative with the food that's in season. One, I think from kind of what you're saying with the Chinese medicine perspective, it's going to support that natural
mhm, mhm.
balance anyway, because I think that we're designed to operate that way. But
Yes, yes.
from a cost effectiveness
Mhm,
perspective, that's really important, right?
mhm,
Because if we can't grow it where we are right now and we have to, haul it in from wherever we have to haul it in from, two things are about to happen there. The first is it's not as nutrient dense as it was when it was first picked 4 or 5 days ago by the time it gets to you. And two, economically, it's going to be more expensive because
mhm,
you're having to transport it from another location where you do have the climate conditions to grow it to where you are right now.
mhm. Ooh.
Ooh.
Ooh, all this interesting good information. I also did, I think, I mentioned it to you, some of the Qigong aspects, and you might have seen some of the videos of like what, even movement wise, what to do in season. Where
Which is so incredibly cool and fascinating. And here's the thing, people underestimate, or like when you go back and you look at these practices, they evolved for a reason. I mean, this isn't just like a new fad.
Mhm.
There's a reason that this has worked
Yeah.
for as long as it has.
Yes, and I know in the classics, like the Chinese classical medicine, the Yellow Emperor's Guide. So this is kind of like the basis of like all Chinese medicine, is this conversation between the emperor, and I call it his homeboy, like Chibo is like his assistant. So the emperor is asking all these questions to his assistant because he's like, why is it like this? Why is like that? So you're kind of learning about Chinese medicine through these conversations. But there's this one, he asks like, why are people not living as long? He's like,
Mm.
why are they not living? The sages, they call it sages, are living to 100, but now they're living half as long. Why is that? And it reminded me of, I think I saw this, and maybe you can correct me too, where our age actually decreased for the first time in the US, like the how long we're going to live.
The longevity. Well,
So yeah, so they, and doing all these and I referenced Tom Bizzio's book a lot because I was like, this is like a treasure chest of information of like how to eat in season, what movements to do.
mhm.
And it's like very simple. It's not even like you almost feel like you're not doing anything, but I have noticed quite a change in like my energy and my focus just doing these exercises. And they take like less than 10 minutes, like 10 to 15 minutes. It's just consistency with how you do it. And it's activating parts of the organs and the channels that pertain to that season. So, for example, the spring is the energy's coming out. You can kind of see these in the plants
Right.
and budding out. So our energy is coming out again. So we're doing stuff like being outside is really good.
Yep.
Being in nature, having flowers around your house if you live in an apartment, let's just say for example, or like seeing green things is actually good for us.
Well, seeing green things, and I do believe from an energetic perspective, when we are able to resync our rhythms more with the
Mhm.
surroundings that we've got around us, it
Mhm.
has tremendous health benefits. I mean, it just does, but that's easy to neglect when we're
Mhm.
on the go 24/7.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, seasonally, I also think different nutrients that are available at different
Mm.
times of the year, there all of this stuff goes together, right? The
Yes.
movement, the feeling that, sun, warmth on your face, and getting
Mhm.
those,
Mhm.
more vitamin D and all of that moving forward. We need to support our health and
Mm.
well-being, I think now more than ever before.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
if you really want to go crazy, you go and you look at like all the things that affect our telomeres and our DNA
Yeah.
and like affect, like you could go down like a
Yeah.
huge rabbit
So
hole with that.
yeah, so the telomeres, I'll tell the people, are like the end parts of the DNA that are supposed to determine how long we live.
Yep.
So, um, yeah, that's very fascinating because I think I read some stuff. I'm not as well versed as you are with that, with those things, but what have you found in your research?
So to kind of put this in perspective, and telomeres, they're best compared to the anklets, that little plastic piece on the edge of your
Hmm.
shoestring, like your
Okay.
sneaker
Yeah.
string. So everybody's born with a certain length, and as we grow and develop and
Hmm.
age, those telomeres get shorter. But there are different things that affect our life expectancy, and they go back to things like what you're eating, how well you're sleeping, what your stress is. All of those things affect telomere length. And I should also point out that telomere length is the other thing that kind of contributes to disease states developing.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
it's just one of these things that we kind of underestimate. Like people know, oh, you should get sleep. Oh, you shouldn't stress. Oh, you should eat well. But there's a lot more going on behind the scenes. Now,
Hmm.
what I'd really like to know is how those life elements that affect telomere strength, like how that translates into things that can be done in acupuncture and Chinese medicine to
Mm.
support that. That would totally geek me out.
You know what? I might look into this. And I have a friend too that he loves research. He's really well versed. I have to send you his info because he talked a lot about COVID and the Chinese herbal side, how that's been very effective to treat it. But also other aspects of health too. To tell him, I will venture to say it definitely will have an effect because getting regular I can tell when I don't get acupuncture for a long time.
So can I. I
Yeah.
can too. People are like, You're going, what's wrong? You're going to
Yeah, you
acupuncture.
don't
I was
have
like,
to have something wrong with you
no. I
to
said,
go.
my daughter likes to go because, like I said, she plays some hardcore volleyball and she
Mhm.
loves getting some of her specific areas
Mhm.
addressed. But for me, it's my tune up. Like I need
Mhm.
it. I need that balance, and I can feel it when I don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if that affects consistent like treatment along with other aspects of health like eating with Chinese herb. I don't know. That's so
And
yeah.
Chinese herbs, yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
you could totally dig into some really fascinating stuff with that. I'll help. I'll like love it. You know me. I
Yeah, I
love that
know.
stuff. I
The
do. I do.
the telomere length. Yeah, that's something I've read about that was super. I mean, there's right there. So, oh my god, this is okay. How much time we have left? Because I'm just like we're gonna talk forever. But conceptually, too, in I think I talked to you about this before. So in Chinese medicine, you're kind of born with what's called like your essence
Okay.
and your
Yep.
Jing. So your Jing is what you got. And I wonder if that is similar. I'm not going to say exactly similar to telomeres, but it's kind of like from your mom and dad what they gave you, and then this is what you have, your Jing, your essence that's stored primarily in your kidney. So it's like the lower area of your abdomen.
Ooh.
Yeah. So your kidney and liver have a very important function in your susceptibility to diseases, to stress. Some people have better Jing than I mean, same thing, right? Some people have better um what do you call it? They don't get as many diseases or they don't get it like right. Those are kind
Yeah.
of like outliers. But how you take care of your essence and your Jing is super important. And it's kind of like your savings in a way. Like you don't want to draw from it too much when you're
Hmm.
young. Because I definitely drew from it during my years of learning.
I'm sure.
Yeah, where I just like kept drawing, and now I'm like, okay, hold on, I'm sorry. Let me take care of you now, and doing all these things for my vitality, my health. Um, the qigong, the what we call the Daoyuan exercises that they created, the sages created. It's like a 2,000-year-old text. Like I think they knew what they were talking about, and maybe they wouldn't have guessed what we had now. But like you said, I think it's more important than ever to kind of look back on this knowledge and look back what has worked for them at that time.
Yeah, and they are actually looking at, I know that they were doing some studies are related to Ayurvedic medicine, which
Mm-hmm.
is, has some similar elements, but as to why different things were working for certain genetic SNPs that people
Mm.
have,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's got to be a reason, and it goes down to, I think we didn't get distracted with all this other stuff. We just knew, like in your case, I feel better if I don't drink alcohol, so I'm not going
Mm-hmm.
to drink alcohol and I'm going to feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And they started to see patterns, you know what I mean, with certain things that are going on, so they developed different protocols or using different herbs or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I can imagine. I mean, it was thousands of years ago with Chinese medicine and with like Ayurvedic
Ayurvedic, yeah.
medicine.
Mm-hmm.
But there are so many, there are just, there are different things. They may be called different names, but they're finding now that, like with Ayurvedic, that they find out is working for a reason and
Mm-hmm.
why it's working. And on a herbal side of things, like they have looked at why different herbs were used in medieval texts. You
Mm.
know what I mean? It's something as simple as oregano. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
but they are now looking at, here's a formula that they put together in these medieval texts, but now we know that it works and why it's working, what
Mm.
properties. So just because something is thousands of years old doesn't, in my mind, this is what I tell my clients, just because it existed doesn't mean that it was wrong. Those ideas of even like that chicken soup when you're sick,
Mm-hmm.
there are properties that are anti-inflammatory in that soup
Yes.
that are
Yes.
serving your body. We just didn't know why. We just knew it worked,
Yeah.
you know?
It's not like they could. I mean, I think nowadays, if they had the technology we had, they would totally be like, "Oh, let's figure this out." And that's what we're kind of doing now with some of the more classical formulas that they use during, they had pandemics too. They had
Yeah.
diseases that wiped out. They're like, "Oh man, we need to figure out how to heal people." And especially during the wartime, especially in China, they had like a bunch of wars, but uh, the famous physicians then used very, like, there's one formula that uses it's guajitang, so it's like a cinnamon decoction um,
Mm.
that you eat with rice too, because that's what they had. And then you would like kind of have a light sweat, so
Okay.
you would kind of bundle yourself up, and when you get the light sweat, then that's when you know that you'll feel better and the disease has gone.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and then he uses very simple formulas. And then there was like the other pandemic of more like heat diseases that they saw. So, for example, like maybe like Ebola, something, high fever, all this stuff. So they use a lot of herbs that are naturally like antiviral, like for example, honeysuckle was one of them,
Okay.
Jinyanhua, and you can see those being used now during COVID as well, depending obviously on the person and their symptoms at that point. Because with herbs, you kind of have to be fast. You have to, if you see the symptoms um, in a disease state, if they're sick, you kind of want to get those herbs to them at that point because it changes. And when it changes, it's gonna be slightly different. But I do give herbs out for other reasons that don't need as a quick turnaround. It might be for long term, just as a caveat. But for like colds and stuff, you have to catch it quite early before it gets more, I would say, internal.
Well, you think about it, it replicates and multiplies, and if,
Mm-hmm.
and it is going to evolve. And I mean, heck, that's what we've even seen with different elements of COVID. Like
Mm-hmm.
it evolved during different stages. And if the effects it's going to have on your body are going to be different
It's
too.
like, yeah, oh my gosh, it's so different for everyone. But it's so fascinating to see. Yeah, I see a couple of like the long COVID patients, and it's so weird. Like even I'm still kind of learning. Like I don't have a bunch, but I know some of my friends have seen more and just trying to figure. We're all just trying to figure it out.
It's hard. I mean, these are things that we've never seen before, but and I was very thankful that when I had COVID, it was very mild for me,
Hmm.
really mild. But the thing of it is I think with anything that happens, even though what we as a world have gone through over this, this is also, it always presents opportunities for other innovations to
Mm.
happen, and for us to maybe revisit Chinese herbs, because guess what? You know what I mean? They existed and they were effective. So
Hmm.
why not
Hmm.
figure out how to use them? Um, I don't know. I try and find opportunities where
Yeah.
in whatever might be sort of this like negative
Yeah. I mean,
circumstance.
yeah, I think of everything like pre and post, and it's definitely, to me, it was, as horrible as it was in one aspect, it also gave me time to rest and kind of readjust my business too. And in the other way, learning more about Chinese herbal medicine.
Hmm.
And of course, in China, because of how rampant it was in the beginning there, they have so much research on the Chinese herbs, and I could send it to you too, of like what's effective. They had like even different stages of what
Oh,
herbs to
that's
use.
cool.
Yeah, and it's all research. It's all like they have tons of people, so they
Yeah,
could they could track,
they can.
and figure out what worked. I thought that was it's just like so much info to go through at that point.
Yeah, and I think this is again an opportunity. People that at first, when COVID was happening, they were canceling appointments with me, and they're like, "Well,
Yeah.
I'll call you back when COVID is over,"
Yeah.
and it was kind of funny.
Yeah.
But the other side of that is now people are recognizing I need to do a better job. of
Mm.
being more responsible with my
Mhm.
health, because I don't know when this next round of variation of this
Mhm.
virus is going to
Yeah.
be, and what impact it's going to have on me.
Mhm.
So not being like kind of crazy about it, but being more intentional about
Yeah.
how you take care of yourself. Do you go do self-care and do acupuncture
Mhm.
regularly? Do you eat well? Are you
Mhm.
sleeping? Are you being gentle with yourself?
Yeah.
All of those things.
And I think a huge part too with mental emotional health was people realize I hate this job, and they're
Yeah.
like, hey, I actually want something that makes me happy, or that is good for me. I think that was another huge shift. What did they call it? The great resignation. That's what they called it.
Yeah. Yeah, and you had a lot of people that retired early too.
Yes, yes. So
It's
it's
crazy.
very fascinating. So we talked for an hour,
I know.
and the flew by. I think we talked about most of the things we wanted to talk about, and all other amazing things too. But again, Tina, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me. I'm sure I'm gonna bring you on again, and we're gonna talk about even more things
Well, thank
related
you.
to health and wellness. But again, thank you so much for coming, and thanks everyone for watching. So I'll see you all next time.
Awesome. Take care.